Time now for the 10-minute war here on Michigan Podcast, which means we bring in our good friend and maybe the world's one and only, somewhat at least, reasonable Buckeye fan. His name is Mark Rogers. He himself has a great channel right here on YouTube, The Voice of College Football. Make sure you're checking it out to get complete coverage of the greatest game ever invented, correspondents, stringers from really every major program in the country. That's what they do year-round. It is good to see you again, my friend, and Michigan heads into its biggest game of the year, maybe so far, maybe second biggest game of the season until we get to the game at the end of the year. The Wolverines and the SP Analytics are one of only two teams, Georgia being the other mark, that are ranked in the top 10 in both offense, defense, and also special teams. So your thoughts about how prepared you think Michigan is for Penn State on Saturday, and vice versa for that matter?
Yeah, this is quite the showdown, as Jim Harbaugh put it. I think he gave it like three big games. There's 63 games played in the Big Ten every year, if you do the math, and this is one of the three biggest games. It's titanic. It's monumental until somebody in the Big Ten Western Division proves that it can play well in a championship game and truly compete, which would be 2023, I guess, at the earliest. This is one of the three games that counts in this conference. And a couple things that come to mind would be, we've got two coaches that have historically struggled in top 10 matchups, mostly on the road, though. So that puts James Franklin in that hot seat right now, coming to Ann Arbor as roughly a 7-point underdog. So we have a quarterback situation with J.J. McCarthy and with Sean Clifford, where you've got almost, for those detractors in the Penn State camp of Sean Clifford, and I tend to be more of a Sean Clifford apologist, it's almost a J.J. McCarthy, Cade McNamara type situation where Drew Allar's waiting in the wings, and he has shown us brief glimpses, nowhere close to what J.J. had showed us with his opportunities, but that they may not be playing the best or the most talented quarterback, but for right now, it's Sean Clifford. The Penn State running game, I'm going to draw that as the biggest difference between what we have seen out of Penn State in recent years versus what they may be bringing to the big house on Saturday, and save the one dynamic NFL first rounder in Saquon Barkley as being kind of the aberration, just an offense unto himself. The combination of offensive line and the two young backs that they have in Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, that this might be the best potentially the best Penn State ground attack that we've seen since Joe Pa was around. And so I think that's going to be a key factor in this game, as well as on the Michigan side. They just don't have the capability of running the ball. They have the capability of running the ball against anyone. When you rack up close to 200 yards against Iowa's rush defense, then that means you can do it against anyone. And even when they know you're going to run the football, and Blake Corum and the offensive line on that side has been that good. This matchup truly intrigues me because I think the talent is equivalent on both sides. They're very similar teams, not necessarily in regards to every schematic breakdown we could make, but more from a personnel standpoint. I liken them very much outside of the quarterback position on both sides of the ball to be very similar teams.
Yeah, for J.J. McCarthy, you've mentioned him. He is 5th in the country right now in passer rating. Sean Clifford is 53rd. He is 12th in the country right now in QBR, and that is where you apply the NFL, metric of rating quarterbacks to collegiate quarterbacks. He's 12th in the country. Sean Clifford is 56th, and I think where that stat is meaningful is the QBR is more favorable to quarterbacks that run. And although J.J. is a very mobile quarterback, Michigan has not asked him to run that much, particularly since Cade went out, because they are worried about him taking hits, where that is a key feature for Sean Clifford, particularly on 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, for him to turn that into a running play with his legs. Do those numbers tell you anything or nothing?
Well, the QBR, in addition to what you just pointed out, I think is a much more valid statistic because it relates the success of a play to the game situation. So if you throw a 3-yard pass, what does that mean? Well, in the pass efficiency stat, it doesn't matter what the situation is, it's a
Right.
3-yard completion. Well, you just threw a 3-yard touchdown pass to win the football game, and that's a highly successful play
Hmm.
versus it being 3rd and 22 and you threw a 3-yard completion. So the QBR to me is much more valid statistic. Yeah, there's no comparison between these two players in regards to their physical skills. And Sean Clifford has somewhat routinely made a couple bad plays that his team has had to overcome. We saw it against Purdue, where not just the pick six with about 6 or 7 minutes left in the game that seemingly lost the game for Penn State, but he had 3 or 4 consecutive drives that I went back and looked at before he put the drive together that won the game, and he somehow pulled it all together and threw some really good balls on that final drive. But he had 4 consecutive drives where he was just missing guys and he was just out to lunch. And he can't have that kind of stretch, most likely can't have that kind of stretch against Michigan, and he is prone to that.
You got to think, don't you, Mark? Both teams are going to have similar game plans here. I mean, Indiana last week, I kept waiting for Iowa to do this. I know it is not characteristic for them to get outside of their base system. It's one of the things that's both adorable or endearing, maybe is a better word, both endearing and frustrating for Hawkeye fans and their opponents, is they don't change their scheme or system for nobody, regardless, unless it's a dramatic situation in a game. But I kept waiting for them on those zone reads or bluff run looks to crash down and just say, you know what, even if McCarthy keeps one of these and houses us in a crease, we cannot let Blake Corum just keep getting 6, 7, 8 yards a crack and bleeding us dry, bleeding the clock dry. We don't have a big play offense. We can't just, keep allowing that to happen. And Iowa never did. Now, Indiana, with Tom Allen as a head coach, a guy as a defensive coordinator, they were really the first team this year to come in and say, all right, we're stacking the box. And even that great run that Blake Corum had on the opening drive, that was Barry Sanders stuff. I mean, he jukes out 4 guys and breaks 2 tackles. That was not a play where there was a crease to go 50 yards. And so that was the first time, and Jimmy admitted at halftime that the big adjustment they made, other than settling the team down, that Mike Hart was okay and letting them hear from coach that he was all right and get refocused, the big adjustment they made was it was finally time to put the game in J.J. McCarthy's hands. That Indiana was just coming downhill on every snap, gap blitzing every single gap, just daring Michigan to say, hey, throw the football against us. And that was the first time someone has said, all right, we're going to dare J.J. McCarthy to beat us. I think Michigan will do the same thing. I think Michigan is going to say, we're going to demand Sean Clifford make 3 or 4 of these kinds of throws before we see that we're going to let, these young running backs and your resurgent offensive line run the football against us. Do you agree with that? And then do you agree that Penn State is going to say, all right, 5-star recruit, show us you can do it 2 weeks in a row? What do you think?
Yeah, so of course you put the game into Sean Clifford's hands if you're the Michigan defense. That's just the way to do it, because he's just not, for as much as, again, Sean Clifford apologist, and that's more from the toughness standpoint, where I saw him battered and beat up and bruised and carrying an offense that had one of the worst 5 rushing attacks in college football on his back for the entire season, and he weathered the storm and he played well late, and I just admired that. But talent wins, and execution and consistent execution of that talent. So he has the arm talent to make Michigan pay, but he generally doesn't do it consistent enough to make you pay. So that's more of a obvious call, I think, on the Michigan side. On the Penn State side, I think that they have, because of Blake Corum's just dynamic open field running, and because of J.J. McCarthy's you're talking about a guy that's not just super talented in both phases of the running and passing games, but also he's been very consistent and he's making the right decisions. You can kind of, do if you do, die if you do and die if you don't, kind of Manny Diaz has that decision to make in regards to that. But that's where I'm a little bit more intrigued, because I do think that Penn State has the athletes to do some things, of course, in the attack mode that Indiana doesn't, and other teams, even Iowa, does not. But Manny Diaz does have a bit of a gambler's mentality and has it in the past as a defensive coordinator. And we'll see if he really trusts his athletes in this game.
So what's your outlook? What do you say, or what do you see happening on Saturday? Now, the power ratings have Michigan with the home field about a double-digit favorite. What I find fascinating is the odds makers open the game at 7 in clear violation of their own power ratings. So they're taking a position on the game. They're taking a pro Penn State position on the game. Early sharp action in a lot of places bet the game down to 6.5. So that's something I think that is worth noting. But how do you see it? How would you analyze it?
Well, we opened up with the track records of the two coaches on the road against quality opponents, and that doesn't bode well for James Franklin. History doesn't bode well in the big house for him, despite what we saw in 2020. Put that aside, and he's gotten drubbed the last 2 times with really good football teams going to Michigan. I am going to spit logic in the face, and I've got a good feeling about this Penn State team, and I have the entire season.
By the way, it'll also be the 25th anniversary commemoration of the 1997 national championship team. A lot of those guys will be back in town, and May's out as well for Michigan. And then you have to think, with the Mike Hart thing. I mean, Michigan's playing every emotional angle in this game possible. So we'll see, but we'll see what kind of an atmosphere that presents for the Nittany Lions come noon on Saturday. Good to see you as always, my friend. Hope you're wrong, but appreciate you. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Steve. We'll see you next time.